luck at the end of the day, but give it a shot. And let me tell you, as a rising power and as a country,
yeah, it is a microphone.
hello.
Yeah. So let me just speak like this, Prashant, you hold. You'll all hear me. You know, as a rising power and as a country with a massive future, the quality of governance is going to be critical in our ability to take our things forward and for the world to accept that you have truly a contribution to make. Governance, therefore, is important, and all of you making your efforts in that side, wish you all the best, all power to your end. आप लोग हिंदी समझते हो? Yes. तो थोड़ा सा हिंदी में बोलेंगे ताकि थोड़ा सा मजा आए. अब प्रियांक जी ने हमने मेरे से सवाल पूछा कि you know what's happening in the world. So let's understand one or two things very simply. When these climate negotiations, look, first let's understand climate change is real, climate change is happening, it is impacting all of us. So you have this sea level rise. This is only a way of telling you what the problem is. You can ask a very simple question. How does 2 degrees make any difference? After all, we have a 20-degree difference in Delhi. But this is global averages and averages over a period of time, and it results in sea level rises which can have catastrophic impact for different parts of the world. Therefore, it's serious, it's happening, and let me say something quite simple. We can argue on all sorts of details about it, but basically speaking, the more the number of us living, let me say, a lifestyle in which a lot more fuel is used, a lot more carbon is used, results in that much more production of greenhouse gases. And these gases, carbon dioxide in particular, have a propensity of remaining in the atmosphere for 100, 150 years. So what your grandparents did is going to impact you. So I'm afraid it's a very complex kind of a situation. Now, when these negotiations started in 1992, 1990s, early 1990s was a very interesting time on the world. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, and for the first time after the Second World War, there was a unipolar world. There was just the United States. So sometimes what happens is, even hegemonistic powers, when they are the sole players, develop, let me say, a sweet spot. It could be a degree of kindness, could be a way of saying, look, I can further my power by being nice to you guys. So 2 or 3 things happened. It's worth remembering for those of you who are studying. Have you heard of the WTO?
Yes, sir.
So the first time the WTO was agreed in the world was in 1945, which is the same time that the United Nations and the World Bank, etc. were set up. And yet you could not have the WTO because the US Senate refused to go along and ratify the thing. The reason being, they realized that they would soon be in competition and there was no need for having this kind of a body. But in 1992, things changed. They allowed a WTO to come up, which is the only major international body in the world where the big players don't have a kind of veto. In the Security Council, you know of the veto. In the World Bank and the IMF, to get major decisions through, you need 85% of the quota shares voting in a particular direction. It's like a company. If you heard of the company's law, if you don't have a special majority, you won't be able to get the most important things through. The United States by itself has 16% of the quota at the World Bank and the IMF. The WTO was created as each country having 1 vote. And you needed that particular thing, and the way forward was you would try to work through consensus, which meant everybody had to have a say and you had to accommodate various people. Very unique. How did a single power agree to do that? The same things happened in the climate negotiation. So 3 conventions were agreed in Rio de Janeiro. The Convention on Climate Change, biodiversity, and on the entire issue of soil, health, all these particular sets of aspects. In climate change, they agreed very interestingly that the responsibility is differentiated. Why? Because the Western world, the industrialized world, had been spewing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for 100, 150 years, and it was impacting the world. And very interestingly, they also agreed that whatever action the developing world does, they will pay for it fully. Can you imagine the state of play? So we can understand this north-south dynamic. But can you understand the state of play now? In 2021, when the Conference of Parties, which means countries of the United Nations, when they gathered in Glasgow, and the meeting happened to deal with climate change. Can you imagine the country which has one of the lowest carbon footprints in the world, India, was, let me say, in the dock, because we refused to go along with what was said. You can say it's just words, but words have policy implication, which was phase out the use of coal. And coal is by far the largest source of electricity. And the whole world is about what? The best thing that you can do in the world is electrify everything. And the next answer is, can you limit the use of fossil fuels in the generation of electricity? That will help so many things happen. And the whole world turned towards us. And in fact, it wasn't India. We were only symbolic. It was the large developing countries in the world. And in fact, these negotiations have turned very interestingly. I'm cutting short a large period from 1992 to 2022-23 to a very interesting game. Instead of being between the north and the south, it has become everybody versus the large developing country. There are some reasons we also need to understand. The China, without any doubt, today China is not only the largest emitter, it is possibly going to become the largest emitter in history. It's some distance away from that, but it is an inevitability that that will happen. We all get plugged along with China, but let's also remember that India's own aggregate emission levels is not very low. It has to be large. Why? Because we are the largest country in the world. And even though our per capita emissions are literally half of that of the developing world, not the world as such, of the developing world. When you multiply it with the size of the population of the largest country, our numbers have to be high. So people will put pressure on us. And therefore, this is a very interesting set of negotiations. And my little thing, Priyank, before I stop, is that India is in that sense one of the most challenged countries in terms of what happens in the global negotiations. Because you not only have the global north telling you, please cut down on fossil fuels, there are various reasons why they want to do that. You have the small and large number of countries in the global south whose interests are also the same, who are also telling you to do the same thing. Now you may say, why aren't they saying this to the global north? But they are. And the global north says, mea culpa, I've done it, but they don't do anything about it. But in the talks keep admitting that. So this is the nature of international diplomacy. In the end, climate change negotiations and talks are a power game of the world. And we, coming from India, which is the next country at the pinnacle of global power, I'm afraid we have to, in a sense, play this ball game and work on this. But we're doing a great job in terms of domestic action, in terms of international action. We have every reason to be proud, both of diplomacy and in terms of domestic action that we are taking in India. Let me stop.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. And very rightly observed that China, while it has the world's largest coal fleet, it is also the country with the largest renewable energy installed. Which means that, as a country, they're pumping in money to transition their economy, right, and their energy systems, but they are not willing. No country is willing to compromise on economic growth. And in that context, how India balances out retiring its thermal fleet while increasing renewable energy, ensuring that energy security is maintained in a global geopolitical environment where people will question you for buying oil from Russia, but people will not identify that Europe is still dependent on oil. The kind of questions that come across to a developing country like India, we are not just playing for ourselves or our voters, we are playing for the entire global south, because how India stands or succumbs to these international pressures is going to be very reflective of how the global south will stand up for its own destiny. And it's not a fight, we have to find those arrangements. And I think with that, I think given the fact that this is a large context, we can come to Trishanth to understand, Trishanth, how do you understand and define resilience, right? Of course, there is a whole natural resilience angle, but there is also this geopolitical resilience angle. How do you ensure the policy frameworks are right for the right state of time? So how do you define and understand resilience in a fast-changing climate? What are your reflections, of what you see at the global level, and then what's happening in India?
Dr. Mike, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thanks, Priyank, for asking that question. Well, climate resilience can be defined in a number of ways, and one of the easiest means to look at it is to look at everyday life. When we watch news, we come across news of how extreme weather impact has been impacting human lives. And what we would like to essentially do is to manage the risks and basically derive opportunities from this environment. So climate resilience is about managing those risks and basically deriving opportunities. If we talk about generational aspect, then we are also looking at how the impacts of climate change would impact us in the long term, and then we would like to see how we can either decrease the impacts of let's say extreme weather events on humanity, and how do we manage this risks for the future generations. So all in all, climate resilience is this. But when we talk about, for instance, take the example of India. India is a big country with almost 8,000 kilometers of coastline. It has a big fishing community that's dependent on the coastal waters. Then we have about 500 million people living around some form of river system that depends on Himalayas for the water, and the Himalayas are reeling from their own problem of glaciers are drying up. So India as a country is facing these challenges, and there's an index that a German organization called 𝗏𝗏𝗄𝐻 comes out with. It's called the Global Climate Risk Index, and India consistently ranks among the top 10 countries within that vulnerability index. Now, why this is important? Because India is also a developing country. It has to cater to its own developmental needs. Besides dealing with climate change, it's not an afterthought. It has to go with the development agenda. So, and when you talk about things like vulnerability, let me give you an example of how vulnerability also impacts investments in a country, because companies or investors would want to look at your investment rating, and that is actually dependent on how you are placed on the climate risk index. So all these kinds of things matter to a country. Now, how do we then chart out what to do in climate resilience? We would like to think about infrastructure resilience, we would like to think about social resilience, we would like to think about ecosystem-based resilience. But it's not just for India. There are developing countries, in fact there are developed countries who are also dealing with climate resilience. example of Japan. Japan faced one of the biggest earthquakes in recent memory in 2011, and that sort of wrecked its nuclear reactor, and that caused energy crisis. Now, what has happened is that Japan has transitioned to natural gas and coal to fulfill that gap. Now, if you ask a country like Japan, because it's a developed country and you would want it to meet its climate targets or energy transition through renewable means, that's an expectation that you will have. But the country does not have land to put solar panels. All it can do is put out offshore wind, and that's a capital-intensive activity. So it has to think about its own challenges in resilience, and this is also something that is true for other parts of the world. There is United States, where in California, insurance companies have stopped basically issuing policies or have increased premiums because they are facing extreme weather events. But what are the challenges and in dealing with these sort of activities or developing a climate resilience? The first is money. Money is hard to come by, and we can get into the debate of what is the figure we are talking about and what is the climate politics around money, and maybe we will talk about it further. But yeah, money is a big problem, and then the problem is of policy, because policy also has to keep up with the changes that are taking place. Every day some new fact comes up, and countries have to come up with new sorts of policies, and those policies are hard to implement because there can be pushbacks on those policies. We are seeing farmer protests in Europe. One of the reasons for farmer protests in France is because the farmers want diesel, that diesel subsidy that was being given to the farmers is now being taken back by the government because it's a climate commitment that it has made. But then the farmers do not want that, and that's one of the reasons why the farmers are holding protests. So you have to consider everything when you talk about policy in climate resilience. In fact, very interestingly, a week after now, there are elections in Pakistan, and two of the leading parties have included climate change action as one of the agendas in their so they have included manifesto. So yeah, and with that I will go back to
Greens in Pakistan. Thank you, Vijay.
Tushar, this is absolutely lovely, because I think you brought in perspectives on how do you understand resilience, but also how it's playing out with other countries, and just makes climate change a bit more humanized, right? We are able to connect the dots with what's happening at other places. And I think that's a great segue to move to Ambassador Puri in understanding, given the fact that this is the global picture of climate trends and politics, and this is how countries are grappling, across the world in trying to be resilient, trying to be active, getting the money and being, having the right policies. I would like you to throw a spotlight on India. What is India doing? I mean, you mentioned that India is rising, and it's our demography that's really at the play, and we have a strong market. But in order to adapt to current environment, and hopefully, most of the students here will get this question in their interview rounds one day in the civil services, that what throws a spotlight in India, what's happening, what are some of the key measures, policy measures India is taking. We have a bold target, and given that spotlight, what is India's long-term strategy? What are our risks and opportunities?
Yeah, let me stand up for a minute. Let me say something to you guys. You get a pulpit, you should never go. आप में से किसी को, are you very clear in your mind? Because I see that you're all very young people. Are you clear in your mind? Why is climate change and the international negotiations important? Why? And what is the problem? Why isn't the world able to come together? I mean, we had COVID. COVID के समय में ठीक है, कुछ लोगों ने वैक्सीन शेयर नहीं किया, कुछ ने कुछ किया, but it's understandable. Generally speaking, the world said, अरे यार, let's come together, लोगों के help करो, मोटा लोग, इसमें क्यों नहीं करते? बताएं आप. Come on, let me ask some of you guys. Sorry, Priyank. hijacking a bit of what you're doing. But you know, I want them to actually understand why this game is on. आप में से कोई बता सकता है कि इसमें why is international cooperation so important?
Because sir, it's a long-term phenomena.
Fair
It's
enough.
not like
but what else?
COVID-19.
That's true. Very true. Can you think of anything else?
Sir, spillover effect.
Of course.
Sir, we
So
are not able to balance the money and climate.
true. So let me put it to you very simply. एक चीज है, आप इंडिया में you burn fossil fuels, greenhouse gases are sort of created. They impact not just Pakistan, but they impact Greenland. So this is the global nature of the game. Secondly, you do it today, it impacts your grandchildren. So there is intergenerational. But much more than all this is a different and straightforward thing. If you burn more fuel, the chances are that your gross domestic product will go up. That means your power will be more. You'll be a more, मैं हिंदी में कहूँ शक्तिशाली देश. Who are the ones who are emitting the maximum amount? Precisely. And this is the source of power. If you tell somebody, please stop burning fossil fuels, given the kind of technology that we have today, तो उसका तो सीन है कि भाई आप तो वहीं रह जाइए जहां पर आप. And so this changeover in the world that we are seeing, whether it's the rise of China or the rise of India, Brazil, Nigeria, etc., becomes a critical issue. This is one side. The other is, with a carbon-led growth, most parts of the developed world have now reached a point where huge amounts of technologies have got developed to decarbonize and yet keep up the growth incentive. But these technologies are both expensive and difficult to implement and very difficult for the developing world. Your colleague here asked me before we came here and said, what do we do about a country like India, which has miles to go on its development path, no choice but to burn fossil fuels, and you are being told fossil fuels को आप बंद कर दीजिए तो हम आगे कैसे जाएंगे? Well, this is exactly what the others want. I mean, nobody will say it. But isn't that exactly what is happening? उसका cost होता है पैसा. That's the way of measuring. But basically speaking, if you do all this, the power game in the world starts moving. So which is why climate change is no different than other power games in the world. You talk about what India is doing. Let me make one or two points very clear to you. You know, the present government, Prime Minister Modi, if you all recall that for a long time, the nature of the game was common but differentiated. So there was a thing called the Kyoto Protocol. The Western world was supposed to decrease its emissions. The United States did not ratify Kyoto Protocol and worked very hard कि Kyoto Protocol ही खत्म हो जाए. Exactly that's what happened. In 2016, we had this, 2015, we had this big conference of parties in a place called Paris, and the idea was given up. Everybody was doing voluntarily. This is what I'll do, this is what somebody else will do. India took on huge and onerous targets on renewable energy. We even set up with the French the International Solar Alliance, and we pledged that we will do all that we can to try and increase renewable energies in India as much as we can and act as a role model. In fact, one of the greatest things, and Shrikant, you were right in mentioning China as having the largest farm for solar power. But because India came on steam, the cost of solar power in the whole world has fallen drastically. To a time, solar power lagane, there was no point in putting it up. It was cheaper to buy electricity from the grid. To a situation where it has fallen dramatically worldwide, we've done it. So we did a lot. Then came 2021. Now one very interesting thing, I might say this to you. In 2015, the American pressure fundamentally resulted in no Kyoto Protocol, no CBDR as it's called, common but differentiated responsibility, everybody equally in the same boat. India and other countries from the developing South Very important. There were elections in the United States. Mr. Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the program. Far from cutting down emissions or taking legal steps to cut down emissions. Whether they did or not is for the states in the United States to do. But it pulled them out from there. And then did anybody talk about climate change from 2016 to 2020? No. Then there were elections. Mr. Joe Biden was elected. And the first act was to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Wonderful. But do you see how global negotiations are being impacted by the superpowers? And how what they wish to do in fact becomes the methodology of doing things. 2021, this COP was held in Glasgow. And the big talk was what? Net zero by 2050. Some of you who've been nodding your heads on common but differentiated responsibility. If I tell you that USA, India, Papua New Guinea, the European continent, China, everybody will do net zero by 2050, what does it mean to you? Net zero, by the way, means that the amount of greenhouse gases that you will emit will be kind of equal to what is captured through natural sources, trees, forests, etc., or you do carbon storage or utilization, etc. What do you think this means? What does it mean? Net zero in China, net zero on the same day in the US, in India, in Papua New Guinea, and anywhere else. What does it mean? It effectively means that there is no differentiation. Very clearly, very strongly. If it had been global net zero by 2050, but following common but differentiated, then the European Union would have had to do today net zero. The United States tomorrow, and India whenever later. But that was not the idea. Anyway, the outcomes, China announced we will reach net zero by 2060. China has grandfathered a large number of things. India announced net zero by 2070. I want to leave one big thought with you. This net zero by 2070, it's very easy for us to say. For someone like me to say, not in my life, how does it matter? It's very easy for your teachers here also to say, ain't gonna happen 2070, 50 years from now. Who cares? Who knows? God knows what. But it's not that. It's the end date. People are going to ask you because you're part of the global order. They're going to ask you today, in the year 2025, what did you do? What are the steps you've taken? In 2030, more steps that you've taken. So it's a calibrated approach, which is why Priyank's very important question. What have we done? We've taken 3 or 4 global targets, other than doing a host of things in the country. Global targets, first one, that as much as 50% of our electricity generating capacity will be renewable by the year 2030, by the way. That's one hell of a tough call. Will we be able to achieve it? I don't know the answer. These are very technical answers and quite difficult to say. And we will reduce the energy intensity of our GDP. As I told you, energy brings about GDP. So if you can expend less energy and produce more GDP, you are doing the world a favor in terms of carbon. And we've taken all these onerous ones, other than a host of other actions. Have you seen electric vehicles? How many of you would have ever thought even 5 years back that in Delhi you would have electricity run vehicles, cabs, Uber equivalents, that you will have your own families thinking of buying an electric car? How many of you would have thought of it? India, again in a major push. Today solar rooftops, almost anybody who has a rooftop says, let's install a panel. It's good for us. We've been making major efforts in the country. And on green hydrogen, some of the largest efforts for producing green hydrogen are taking place in India. The world's largest electrolyzer. You know, you have to convert water or ammonia or something to release hydrogen ion. NH4 या H2O, कहीं ना कहीं से H को तो निकालना पड़ेगा. So what you need is, what is green? If the energy source which is used to produce, to break up this molecule, if that is produced from a green source, good. Otherwise, the key issue is the amount of energy that you use to release a hydrogen atom should not be so much that it's much more is used than what the hydrogen atom produces. I mean, it's obvious economics. We're doing so much of that. We've been global leaders by ourselves. And yet, I must end but mention this to you. Why is it that in the negotiations, we fight, make every effort that we will not agree to phase out coal, we're willing to make all efforts on phase down. Why is it that we try to bargain for the ability to be able to use carbon? Because we as a country which abides by international law and rules want to ensure that the legal regime gives you the policy space to take action, while domestically we will commit to everything. We don't want to bind ourselves to it. And that's, in a sense, a typical hallmark of rule, not takers, but those who do have a certain amount of wiggle room. And that's where India is. Sorry, I stood up, used the pulpit. Sir, ये तो प्रोफेसर साहब पूछ रहे हैं.
No, I have a question. I teach
Sorry.
environmental chemistry, especially air pollution. I'm a teacher of air pollution. Everything is chemistry, whatever we are talking.
Yes.
So I will take the example of ozone depletion. It's a case, and we have Montreal Protocol and all that. And for that, Nobel Prize in chemistry goes to 3 big scientists. So it's a scientist who has to play their role.
Yes.
We have to talk less and work more in the field of scientists. I think, in my view, a scientist can be a good bureaucrat through their work.
Sir, आपने बहुत अच्छा बोला. Of course, this is science. The use of coal to generate electric power and take this on is science, isn't it? So you did it.
Hydrogen and all
No,
that.
so you did it. You will find the answer. But science, the pace at which these things happen, if you can suddenly find the mRNA vaccine, everybody will take it, there will be no issue at all. But the reality in the world is that only scientists in a few places will do it, and the entire business of IPR, all these issues of global governance come to fore.
One of the successful is the Montreal Protocol is there.
So sir, let me make this. You are familiar with Montreal Protocol, so this thing called ozone. Why do you think it succeeded? Yeah, I must tell you why it succeeded. It's a very limited thing as compared to energy, the entire world of energy and the entire world of carbon, which is our entire life, as compared to ozone and the ozone depleting substances, which were basically in 2-3 things, air conditioning being one of the ones. Sir, something very interesting happened. A large American company called 𝗙𝗵𝗿𝗄 discovered the alternate to the then ozone depleting substances. And so it made sense for the United States to say, we will pay for this to happen. So this is a very interesting game. And have you noticed how, as the climate negotiations have progressed, people have, since the Chinese have also got the same thing now, the Indians are also getting the same thing. People are saying this is no longer something which qualifies. So this happened as a result of technological development, and so it was wonderful. You would have to buy the alternate substance to the previous ozone depleting substance. The only company which could sell it was a company which was an American company. So if I agreed to do it, sir, if you don't mind my saying so, and we have a good American here, it was a very nice example of public money resulting in private gain, all for your country, sir. And that it helped the global cause. So good for it, we shall clap.
The Nobel Prize in that.
Yes, sir, the Nobel Prize went to the scientists, not for the action. The actions were clapped by all of us. Yes, sir.
I will at this point, just come in and say that I think on the broad conversation here, for the audience and
What I
also-
mean, we have more to work, there is less to talk.
Of course. No.
So there are 4 levers of acting on the climate change problem: technology, policy, finance, and behavior. I think all of us can do without a mic, so that's good. There are 4 levers to act on the climate problem: technology, policy, finance, and behavior. Science falls under the technology space, but to leverage science for good impact and also the speed it requires, you need the right policies and the finance to flow. And when we look looking at the India story, right? Sir mentioned solar and hydrogen development, which are technology and policy levers being leveraged. We have a target to reduce the cost of hydrogen just like we reduce the cost of solar, because that's when our market is lucrative for finance to flow in from other places. India does not have the finance, especially to compete with the dollar figures and transition the entire system. 2070 or whichever year net zero means, you are transitioning your entire system of producing energy, consuming energy, and you just don't have to transition the system. You have to reorient people's wishes and desires that they want to be more efficient and less footprint on the energy, which is why we've taken these short-term targets till 2030, which means we will reduce our emission intensity, we will increase our renewables to 50%, or we want to get 500 gigawatts by 2030. That's a huge target given the fact that we are currently at 180. We are starting 2024, but we need all these levers to come in. And which is why the distributed renewable energy story of using rooftop solar, but also these solar appliances to create livelihoods and jobs is huge for India. Because if we don't provide for jobs, we really cannot grow, and if we can't grow, nobody really cares about sustainability, because ultimately decisions on climate need to make an economic sense. That said, this is where today's climate change challenge is not just a scientific problem, because there are people who did not have a choice but to get employed in the coal sector, the poorest of the workforce. And now luckily, this time at the COP28 that happened in Dubai, they agreed on the term that civil society has been calling on for years, which is the just energy transition. That you need to transition away from coal, but in a just manner, which means nobody is left behind. Communities are given the support to transition, industries are given the finance and technical capacity to move away, which I think is a good leeway to look at again COP28, but moving away from the technology, mitigation and political side of the story to the more nature, consumption and life part of the story, to Prashant, on COP28 outcomes, particularly on focusing areas on food, land, water, right, the global goal of adaptation. I think that will give our audience a good flavor of what things are happening. And after this, maybe I have one more round, if time permits, to ask these our speakers about what's up ahead next. Yeah, Prashant.
Just to add to the flow in a very short comment on this, that when we talk about science and mitigation efforts or the climate politics, I'll give you an example. The tripling of renewable energy goal was being focused on at the beginning of this year's COP, and numerous countries jumped the bandwagon of signing that agreement. India did not sign, and it made headlines why India did not sign that agreement. Tripling of renewable is not now a significant goal to keep, because it is already becoming a business as usual. So if the European countries are signing such an agreement, it's not a big deal. The problem was that the agreement also had a point on phasing out coal. Now, 55% of the global emissions from energy comes from oil and gas. They are not ready to talk about it. They want India to phase down coal. India, by the way, it's also the question of region to ramp up renewable energy. What about the states that now supply coal? What will happen to them tomorrow? What will happen to their workforce? What will happen to their GDP? That's in a big way dependent on it. So climate politics has to do a lot in all of this. It's not just the science. Of course, the science has to be there to tell what has to be done. In fact, in COP, it was demanded that by the next global stocktake that is going to take place in 2028, there should be some kind of assessment from the IPCC for its next cycle. When this meetings took place, India and other countries said that it needs time, and the IPCC needs time to do the research, and so there's kind of it's both. Science has to help the policy making, and policy has to go back to science every time when it's required. To to answer the question that Priyank has asked about mentor and yeah, I'll relate this to the climate politics, and again going back to COP, what happened at COP. I'll focus on two major issues that are loss and damage and adaptation. On loss and damage, you might have heard he said this is the red line for us. We want the principle of equity to be there in any discussion on finance. And when we are discussing about mitigation, when the developed countries want us to set targets on climate, we at the same time dig our heels and ask for where's the finance to do it. And we'll do any sort of action that we want to take should be contingent upon you giving some sort of financial or resource help to us. So this is also the debate in loss and damage and adaptation. Nowadays, nothing much happens on land or forest or agriculture in COP discussions, but this COP was unique because it had dedicated days for health and food and agriculture. Deforestation wasn't discussed as much, but there's a growing understanding that agricultural systems are impacted by climate change, and they have also been a source of climate change. So this has been picking up in the politics of climate change. So in this, methane is something that is of interest to the world now. Methane is gaining more relevance in climate talks. Why? So there are two parts to the methane discussion. One is that 60% of the methane emission is from anthropogenic activity. 30% of the climate emission is from methane. Out of those 60% of anthropogenic emission, 30% is from agriculture. And where does this methane from agriculture come from? It's mostly from the developing countries, India, China. And where does the other 30% of the methane come from? It's from oil and gas flaring in the developed world. So while the developed world would like to talk about agriculture-based methane from India and China, the developing world is interested in talking about oil and gas-based emissions from the developed world. And you know, one of the arguments that is made by India-like countries is that these methane emission from agriculture in India are survival emission. It is not a luxury emission for us. It's a survival issue, and it's difficult for us to cut down. So how do we do that? So this is also gaining some ground in climate politics, and there is politics in all of this besides the science of it.
There's only politics in it.
So I was
Power game of nations.
Yeah, that's. I just wanted to touch upon the politics of all of this. Back to Priya. Thank you.
No, I think, Prashant, I really like how you are inculcating messages, but also core conceptual information in your answers for our audience. And you know, these small distinctions on methane, which is one of the most dangerous greenhouse gases, has not yet been targeted, and how the world is looking at it, and you know, what is India's stance, what is the United States stance. I think this is good. We are slightly running late, but we have time for one more round. And you know, I will try to make this. We'll try to do this in a shorter version so that we can get about 2-3 questions from our audience as well. But we'll ensure that they are already participating to that extent. That I'm very happy about. Ambassador Puri, just 2 parts to my next question to you. One on, you know, we spoke about technology, finance, policy. There's a 4th angle of behavior and lifestyle change, right? And you're somebody who's seen lifestyles and materialistic levels of consumption in different countries. You are also somebody who's seen how different generations are adapting to climate or maladapting to it. So what is your funda on lifestyle change? It's very difficult. Sometimes one can say the more basic you go in our history and ethics, we find more clear ways of living. But what is your funda? How do you think that is? And secondly, when we look at that, how do you prepare India's institutions for active monitoring, action, and management of climate issues? Institution could be the road survey authority, to the civil services, to the local panchayat. Like what are the shifts that are needed? And in that, how do you engage in lifestyle shift? What is impact in that space? It's a future question.
It is, and I'm very happy. You know, we are now going away from international cooperation and so on, maybe contributing to. International cooperation is no different than the simple power game. That's what happened in Ukraine, and it was very nice of you to bring it up. Lifestyle change. Look, we in the developing world have always stressed the idea of lifestyle. Prime Minister Modi, in fact, mentioned this, the concept of life, using this acronym, but it's basically lifestyles and environment at the Glasgow Conference. What does the developed world stress on? They stress on the same thing possibly, but here comes the twist in it. Sustainable production and consumption. Now from their perspective, the important thing is sustainable production. Your companies start behaving better, they use less carbon, your electricity production is more green, you will be more energy efficient, etc. Why do we stress on consumption? Because we see conspicuous consumption all over the West. And in our case, the consumption is even below survival level. And so we talk of this. And hence, this particular aspect itself becomes a bit of a contentious subject, even though you would say it's no-brainer for all. What should India do? Frankly, I'm very clear in my mind. No matter the global contestation, that's a different space. You ensure that you have policy space for it. But within your country, you have no choice but to accept the fact that climate change is happening its consequences as are being defined by this narrative are there. You won't get the money to do it. You won't have the ability to do it. Your own mind will not ask you to do it. So what needs to be done? Currently, climate change, carbon footprint needs to be mainstream. It needs to be mainstreamed across every activity. Whether you're building a road, you're building a building, constructing a house, you want to, make Golgappas, whatever else, you need to mainstream this particular aspect. Have you noticed we started a little bit, every single pack of food writes how many calories there are. You may pay attention, you may not pay attention, but this is how things begin. This is absolutely critical. And we have little choice but to mainstream this. When you mainstream it, slowly but surely every institution starts setting up standard operating procedures to ensure that there is measurement and hence if there are targets to control them. And then we come to the next point. The world is not going to be at the present level of things, be able to do without generating carbon. Can we do something in terms of offsets? Can we do something within the economic system such that if you produce and she doesn't, can we find some tradability such that the common goal of this hall remains a reasonable and acceptable net of figure? And that's what takes you to carbon markets, which is really a work that Prashant has worked on. And how can we introduce these things? I am fully convinced that we haven't grandfathered things in India. We've been late to the game, but we are a developing country. We were a colonized country till 75 years back. We hardly had the abilities to do these things. In fact, we suffered deindustrialization, etc. Given all of this, we have much catch up to do. But it comes at a time when the global narrative has changed. So I'm afraid while doing your catch up, you need to be smart, you need to be willing to understand that the narrative has changed. Can you jump the gun? And can you say, I won't make the mistakes that the others did? If technology allows you, yes, it's a very difficult call. But my understanding is that climate change is being fast mainstream into everything that India does. I assure you, a simple little thing, your own college will want to do in a few years' time if you continue with these kind of discussions. Like how can we make the college emissions neutral? And these are small but critical steps which if taken in a discrete manner, they result in this kind of stuff happening. I'll give you one little example. COP was held in Glasgow in 2021. The next one in 2022 was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Many of us may not know, but Egypt actually is an oil producer and actually exports some oil. It's not a great oil. 2023, the world's greatest oil exporter, hosted the COP. Where do you think the next one is being hosted? Azerbaijan. What is Azerbaijan? It's an oil exporter. 90% of its economy is dependent on oil. We are the third largest buyers of Azerbaijan's oil. Has it happened just like that? Let me quote to you something from The Economist. It's a lovely line. What do you think The Economist would have written in 2021 after COP26 there, when everybody found that we were no good because we said no phase out to coal and only agreed to phase down? What do you think they would have written? Just imagine it in your head. What do you think they wrote after the Dubai COP? Here is what they say. 2 years later, the great grandfather of everything which comes from the Western world, The Economist, says, the call to phase out fossil fuels was both economically infeasible and politically naive. You understand where this comes from? The consequences of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the resulting crunch of energy, the rising costs in Europe. Life is like that. But listen to carbon markets. Sorry, Prashant, I'm taking advantage of the fact that we know that Tushar is worked on it. Because this possibly will be the game that we will have to play in India. And each and every one of you needs to become aware. Because frankly, all the rest of it that we talk about, behavioral change and all, it's okay. But nothing changes behavior as much as money. And that's what's going to happen.
Right. Well, thank you. I think if somebody is writing a report on the panel, you can just make this tagline: nothing changes behavior as much as money, right? And have a photo of the three of us. But I think this is a great segue, and this is the last question I pose to the panelists, which is, Prashant, as Ambassador Puri just mentioned, carbon markets. Last 4-5 years have seen a lot of development on carbon markets, trading mechanisms. You've got other countries pushing it. I just want you, the way you've been doing, explain to us what carbon trading is, what a carbon market is, what is happening in the world, what it means for India, and what is India doing in response. So that this is the last snippet of wisdom, real information wisdom, that might help our audience understand this issue, but also maybe build a career in this line. Because new areas have new opportunities and have new players always, right? So some of you can really be in that space. So on carbon markets.
Well, very currently, three things are important to back why we should learn about carbon markets. One is that India is developing its own carbon market. It is developing policy on the domestic carbon market. And then we have international issues like CBAM, there is a European carbon market, and there are trade issues happening world over, which connects us back to the issue of carbon market. What carbon market is, to give you a fair example, let's say there is a company A that wants to cut down its emission, but it is hard for that company to do so, it's very costly for that company to do so. It can pay company B, which can cut down its own emission and basically claim that the emission reductions happened because company A paid company B the money. I think it might have not made much sense, but I can explain it in another way. Let's say you have a patch of land and you want to grow trees on it. You have 1 acre of land and you want to plant trees. You plant trees on that. You want money for it because you had put money into those 1 acre of land to grow trees. You approach a certain industry which wants to cut down its emission and is interested in paying for it. So what essentially happens is that your trees are sequestering carbon, they are absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, let's say 100 tons, and a company, by paying you a certain amount, can buy those 100 tons of absorbed carbon that your trees have done for itself and claim that those reductions happened because of their money. So by that, they claim carbon neutrality, green sustainability, and all those headers. So this is the principle of carbon credit or carbon offset market. Now, the trading that happens in carbon credits develops the carbon market. There is already a carbon market. There is already a carbon market since the time of Kyoto Protocol. It developed the clean development mechanism. You might have heard about it. Clean development mechanism over time became the cheap development mechanism because it basically became a failure later on. There was an oversupply of carbon credits and nobody to buy it, so the prices fell down. And what replaced that sort of a market was a voluntary carbon market where certification bodies issue certificates of carbon to companies and companies sell it to other companies in the world. This is a completely unregulated market. Then there is a compliance market that exists in pockets of the world, like the European Union's emission trading system, or there is a California-based emission trading system. There is even a trading system in China, South Korea, Australia, and India is looking to develop its own carbon market, and it is playing around with the idea of what to do in that regard. So that's basically an introduction to carbon market. I would be happy to discuss more if somebody is interested.
Sure. Well, this has been great. This has been really great. I have 5 minutes. I can use that to summarize the panel or just collect a few questions. And since we have an audience that has been very committed with their time towards us, three questions we can take collectively. If there are any questions, please raise your hands. we've tried to incorporate as many concepts, as many narratives and commentary pieces in the last 90 minutes for everybody. And we very enjoyed this conversation growing between the three of us. But any questions, people? Yes. Just we'll correct a few questions.
So, sir, when we talk about climate legislations and the treaties that are there, Paris Agreement happens to be one of the most important ones. We talked about how climate change and the rise in temperature 2 degrees, preferably under 1.5. But so when we talk about the concept of NDCs, the nationally determined contributions of each and every nation, the flexibility that this treaty offers, in my analysis, I feel it is a reason for the lack of success of the treaty. Countries like Rwanda, Bhutan are taking implementable goals, they're taking a lot of action. But the main contributors are still having that flexibility, okay, maybe we can just set what target suits our suitability. So what is your opinion on this?
We'll collect questions. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question that we talk about green hydrogen and all hydrogen. There are so many hydrogen, blue, grey and all that. Now white hydrogen is also there. So as such, it's whatever in big picture, it's all chemistry. Whether it is carbon dioxide or in all cases. So we see that it's a chemistry which is playing very much critical role everywhere. Whether it is sea level rising, is polar ice caps and glacier and all that. So we know that it's what are the measures we are taking within India, and how many chemists or scientists we have involved in different to understand all these global parameters, global warming, any other global matters related to environment. So how much the role chemists actually are playing in the globally, or how of course they are the only one which can play very much critical role, because they can only contribute, like green hydrogen is the role of chemistry. Everywhere it's the role of chemistry. So because they have contributed, and you have to bear with the byproduct as well, pollution or something else. But everywhere it's the chemistry which is contributing. How the globally the leaders are taking chemistry as a measure, or how the globally scientists are, as a chemist people are working to tackle all this, because ultimately they have to give a solution. No, because chemistry means solution. But there is no other parameters, so we talk, we discuss, solution will not come from that. The solution will come from the chemistry.
Thank you, sir. Any other question? The last, yes.
As I have already asked some questions, I hope the panelists will not mind it. I am also going to ask one more. So, sir, as Ambassador Puri has highlighted that we have two mainstream climatic discussions. In an era in which the things like greenwashing are becoming common, and we have heard this term in the last few days. So, apart from exposing these things and apart from generating awareness, what role we as an academic institutions or think tanks or universities, what the role we can play in forging climate resilience per se? So what can be our role in streamlining this climatic negotiation? So I'm going to
Thank you.
Thank you, panel, for the informative remarks. So my question is that we did discuss a lot about India, that what is India's role and how far have we reached in this, and how we are faring better than other countries. But so since you all already mentioned that we live in an interdeveloping and also an interdependent world. So in that case, like how do we ensure fruitful cooperation? Because without the cooperation, if one country is going to do something, the others are going to balance it equally. So that's just going to lead to economic degeneration and stoppage of growth, which no one actually wants. So because of this power play in this, how much time do we have left for that? Because you see that the world is already coming to, we are edging and inching closer to 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperatures, as it's the real time which is being drawn now. So do we have time for power play still? And what do we do with it for it? Like?
Sure. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Yes.
There are parallel phenomena like El Nino used to Trump, people used to say El Nino has come, and because of that climate change is happening. So I think it's in the geopolitical terms also, I think there are lots of buzzwords are going around that the people are highlighting too much. And I think it's more about buzz rather than it's happening really.
Sure. Thank you. Speakers, I'm also tempted to answer a few
You answer.
questions.
I'm happy. We don't say 𝗙𝗵𝗃.
We've actually all, discussed on this collectively. Right? I'll just mention that Ambassador Puri very rightly highlighted that the Kyoto Protocol did not work because it created a top-down structure that developed countries reduce their emissions in the next 10 years by this much %, developing countries can do this much. When it failed, wisdom dawned upon the world that why don't we create a treaty that is bottoms up, every state their voluntary best effort, so that you are compelled not by a formal obligation, by the promise, but rather the promise you made yourself. Which means the expectation is that in 2015, when you made a little nationally determined contribution, in the next 5 years when you update it in 2020 and then again, or every 3 years as you do it, you are putting your best efforts possible which are suitable to your national circumstances. That gives the flexibility for countries to pick up progress on a country like Brazil may be able to pitch a huge deforestation target because it has the means. So the reason, as you said, these soft law and hard law, Paris Agreement, for example, today, if I break one of the particular laws of war, the conventions, you can hold me accountable in the international court. If I break the Paris Agreement or I move out of the treaty, like Trump, there's no formal proceeding that can happen. It's only the political backlash that will happen. Because it's a soft law, it's not a hard law. But the design of this law is bottoms up to encourage countries to continue to act and not be forced to act. Because the moment they are forced to act, politicians are likely to look at their seats and their domestic priorities than an international commitment. Right? So with respect to hydrogen, sir is very right, there is green hydrogen. You do electrolysis, that electrolyzer, the machine, if you power it through renewable energy, the hydrogen you create is green hydrogen. If you do it power it through nuclear energy, it will be pink hydrogen. The color of the hydrogen and the chemistry properties are going to be the same. But the process and the source energy you use to create that process will define the color. So different countries are pitching for different. For example, British Petroleum is saying green hydrogen is good, but let's remember hydrogen is good. So even if you create your hydrogen through coal, blue hydrogen is good. What do you say? Dubai, on the other hand, is interested in exploring pink hydrogen, right? Because they think if we develop nuclear capacity, our coal question will not be our oil will not be tested, so we can do that. But the question that you ask is, what is the role of scientists and to what level are they actively involved in these processes? I will say that first the story actually develops into a scientific story, then it is picked up by the politicians, later on by the business, and when it is communicated, it comes with buzzwords. But the real story is at the heart of scientists. I will share one example, little thing. Just like there is this whole body of climate change and climate sciences, there is also a different body called geoengineering, which is making artificial man-made changes to the delicate atmosphere and environment of Earth to create conditions where either you are reflecting more sunlight to reduce warming, or you are capturing carbon in the ocean by ocean fertilization. These are very sensitive, controversial technologies that have not been proven but need to be researched, because, to your last question, we do not have enough time, and there will be a time when we will have to take even more aggressive measures. But we cannot let the global north to lead on the rules for these technologies. We need all countries to be involved. India, the Department of Science and Technology, has been supporting research efforts, not experimental efforts, with the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. And I was just in August, September, part of a workshop where we had only atmospheric physicists and chemists, right, of different fields and different private and academic and government institutions presenting their work on understanding what is the level of science that India has, what is the level of science that others have, and if that makes sense, then only the Department of Science and Technology will put a policy imperative on creating India's policy on that front, and then it will be communicated as our narrative to the world, and this is the line we draw. So scientists are very much involved, but the question is, by the time the conversation reaches us, local people, in the audience, on the streets, in the newspaper, are we listening to the scientists and the people who are doing that chemistry and defining the efficient measures, or are we listening to the anchors and others who are using the buzzwords? So it's a very important question. The role of science is always needs to be mainstream. It is not mainstream enough. I led, on the question of greenwashing, the role of academic institutions, and how much time do we have left, and others with our speakers. But this was just some of my snippets. I really got interested by the question. Yeah. So, any question,
So, you want me to, let me say 𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗃, giving you the theory of it all. You know why the Paris Agreement happened? Not because, no.
The open declaration.
The reason why he's saying is absolutely the correct theory. You ain't gonna get away with a hard push. Let's try a soft approach. Soft approach. But it happened because the Chinese and the United States came on the same page. The reason is what China has been doing. While putting up one thermal power plant every week for the last 20 years, they also have the largest green renewable energy. So actually they have grandfathered themselves. And you can't tell anyone switch off. That doesn't happen. Actions have got to be asked prospectively. You can't say, my children built it, now what do I do? It's not possible. You have to be realistic. And these are power games. China and the United States need to cooperate a lot. In 2015, there was reason to cooperate. And hence, when the two came together, where was the rest of us left? You have to make the best of the situation that you find. So these are realities. This is how these negotiations. I read that little piece from The Economist for you. You think The Economist would have said the same thing in 2021 when we were talking in terms of net zero by 2050? It would have said very simply, fossil fuels out. And yet, in 2 years' time, because the shoe has started pinching, that's the nature. In our families, this happens, doesn't it? If it hurts you, it's not good, even though you know it's good for the world. Global hegemony is exactly the same. But we are progressing up the ladder from being rule taker, if not to rule maker, at least being one of those who need to be consulted before the rule gets made. That puts you in that position. That's why Rwanda and Bhutan can do what they will. We all clap for them, give them a medal, but then things move on. Sir, I hope you didn't by any chance at all sound like a climate denier. Because I have gone through this in my life. And while it's the most easy argument for us in India to pick up, because then we are completely justified in what the world says are naysayers on taking action. I don't think that's the case. I think Priyank put it very well. Ideas come up through science. But globally, science is also a very politicized matter. I can tell you, if we talk of the COP being a politicized forum, since nobody really reports of what happens at what is called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is all scientists, what happens there, let me tell you, the COP looks like a mandir or a masjid or something like that. That's the nature of it. Because all of these things are questions of wherein lies my interest, wherein lies that. There's hardly anyone who's washed in mother's milk at this thing. It doesn't happen like that. And that's the nature of this entire particular set of observations. But you ask the question, how much time? The chaps who want to push you to do something, they say it was yesterday. Those who say what Professor Saab just kind of hinted, they say, ho jayega. I mean, I don't know. I personally am a believer in technology. But as everyone says, you can't just be sitting under the tree waiting for the apple to fall. Till that apple falls, you better set up regulations, you better start doing other things. In the end, you have to wait for the apple to fall. The control of COVID, wouldn't have happened if a great deal of action on the technology front hadn't happened. But on the other hand, if you had said no lockdowns, nothing, aa jayega, jab vaccine aayega, sab bach jayenge, there will be 10 million of us down. It doesn't work like that. So that's the nature of where we are. One day, perhaps soon, can't say, I am not an expert. One day, will we find something alternate or some things alternate to carbon in its relatively easy form, which has propelled our life in the last 250 years. Sir, you will be at the forefront of that.
Great. Well, this is very helpful. Tushant, any last words? Okay. Then I think we just not touched on one question that was asked on greenwashing and role of academic institutions. I think this is where there is a real opportunity for our community, and when I say our community, I'm just considering ourselves as a member of the academy. We are sitting here, but for your community, students, academia, experts, to delve, for example, in 2022, the UN Secretary General commissioned a high-level expert group of leading policy makers, policy professionals, some scientists, politicians, to come up with rules. Some active protesting in the campus.
Private activists.
Climate activists protesting. And the question is that he commissioned a new high-level expert group to create the rules of defining, to create the anti-greenwashing squad, which will create the rule book for what standards and policies do companies, countries and cities have to comply by. Because today, when you order your food on Zomato says we are doing green delivery. Today, this is says that we are using solar in our plants, so we are carbon neutral. You are using solar to burn coal, but you are calling yourself carbon neutral. So there is all kinds of statements and protocols, which is why a global rule book is needed, right, to counter greenwashing, and that is where a lot of role of academic institutions analyzing different things, the role of communication, but also how different things are affecting industries and countries is important, and this space is opening up. I think climate, unlike the military or even the foreign services, right, is less opaque. It is open to new perspectives, new experts, and new areas, which is why you have literally a multi-generation panel in front of you, coming with their own insights and whatever perspectives we have from our different backgrounds. And that is the same door of opportunity that is open to all of you as professionals, as students. That is open to us, that we have to constantly learn new concepts, right? And you will also have the opportunity to impact something like greenwashing from the academic world. And there are enough institutions that are willing to support and enter into partnerships. And if you have an idea or you have an interest, India right now is a land of opportunity. So some students also ask about building a career in this space. This is, if technology and climate have the next 10 years, and the beauty of these things is that they are open to other sectors coming in and also finding the space, because climate is not just for the protesting activist or the scientist or John Kerry, who's the climate ambassador. It's for everybody. So we all have a space there. Thank you.
I would like to thank our esteemed speakers for the way they generously answered all our queries, both complex and nuanced. It is a testament to your spirit and dedication, along with open dialogue and collaborative problem solving. We truly appreciate your patience and willingness to engage with our team and the audience in such a meaningful way. On behalf of the whole team of 𝗏𝗏𝗏, we thank you all for your esteemed presence. We are deeply humbled by your decision to grace this event by sparing your valuable time for us. Your participation has undoubtedly elevated the discourse and enriched the learning experience for everyone involved. Thank you.
We will now be announcing the winners for 𝗏𝗏𝗏, the environmental quiz held in the morning today itself. Talking about 𝗏𝗏𝗏, every year 𝗏𝗏𝗏 conducts 𝗏𝗏𝗏 under the ambit of Mausam, where participants' knowledge of environment-related aspects is tested. Now, proceeding to announce our winners for today, the third position in 𝗏𝗏𝗏 is bagged by 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Please come on stage. I would request Mr. Priyank sir to kindly felicitate our third position winner. Thank you, sir. The second position in 𝗏𝗏𝗏 is bagged by 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Krish, please come on stage. I would request Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 sir to please felicitate our winner.
Proceeding with announcing the first winner for Vasudha. Brace yourself. We are truly winners in our own right when we decide to take part in these competitions, but nonetheless someone wins. So the first position is bagged by Vipin Kumar. I request Mr. 𝗏𝗂𝘁 sir to kindly come to the podium.
Wish you all the best, man. Well done, well done.
A very hearty congratulations to all the winners. Now I would request Vipin sir to kindly give memento to Mr. 𝗏𝗂𝘁 sir. I would now request 𝗙𝗏𝗏 sir, a faculty member, to give the memento to Mr. 𝗚𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗃 sir. Thank you. I now request Ritu ma'am, our faculty member, to kindly give a memento to Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗃 sir.
Proceeding further, I would request President of 𝗙𝗵𝗴, 𝗏𝗂𝗏𝗃, to kindly deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. I extend my deepest greetings to one and all present. The panel discussion today encompassed and analyzed the effectiveness of policies and actions that improve resilience to climate change, as well as deliver sustainable outcomes, and how a coordinated policy response is needed to ensure that new and existing infrastructure networks are resilient to climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an honor hosting Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 sir and Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 sir, who kindly consented to be our guests and who enlightened us with such crucial and indispensable insights into the world of climate resilience. I am sure each one of us benefited greatly from today's discussion, for which we are extremely grateful to our respected guest, Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 sir. With this, we culminate Mausam, the Climate Talks, which is our annual flagship event. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our principal, Professor Dinesh Khattar, to college administrators and support staff, faculty members, and our convener, Dr. Leena Devi ma'am, as well as team of 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗃 for their constant support and guidance. Thank you, audience, for participating so engagingly and actively in our discussions and for your patience. Thank you.
My deepest thanks to everyone. Your engaging questions and active listening powered this session, making it a true success. You, the audience, are the bedrock of 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗃's mission to inspire future leaders. Remember, this is just the start. 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗃 will continue fostering impactful sessions like the fertile ground for sowing the seeds of change. As we conclude, please exit through the back doors, but know that the doors to 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗃's knowledge and inspiration will always remain open. We look forward to welcoming you back for future sessions, but together we'll build a much brighter future brick by brick. Now I request the audience to kindly move out of the seminar hall. All the members of 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗃 and the teaching staff are requested to stay back for the group photographs with